Hikmah History presents Salahuddin Ayyubi, or Saladin, who went on to establish the Ayyubid Dynasty, which ruled Egypt, Syria and Palestine. But he is most famous for his role in the Crusades, which has been depicted in later literature and even films such as Kingdom of Heaven, a great movie by the way. He also has the unique privilege of enjoying an almost unanimously positive reputation, even amongst his foes, so much so that he is often depicted as the model of chivalry in Christian Europe. So was he as great as his reputation makes him out to be? Before we can answer that question, we need to find out some basic facts about Saladin. Born in 1138 near Tikrit in modern Iraq, Saladin was born with the name Yusuf. He only adopted Saladin later as kind of like a nickname which means righteous of the faith, in the same way that modern day rappers do. One interesting detail about his origins is the fact that Saladin was Kurdish. This is important because in the 19th and 20th century, he was culturally appropriated by Arab nationalists as a symbol of greatness of the Arabs in the past. The most obvious link between Arab nationalism and Saladin can still be seen today in the coat of arms of many Arab countries, whereby the eagle of Saladin, a symbol often associated with the great man himself, is shown on the coat of arms of Egypt, Palestine, and Iraq. Now if I was Kurdish, I don't know how I'd feel about that, but this isn't the first nor will it be the last instance of cultural appropriation in order to fit a modern ideology. As with anybody who achieves a level of success in any field, be it sports, politics, the military, science, the time it took to hone and cultivate those traits and skills which eventually propelled them into the limelight are often carried out before they hit the bright lights of the stage. This is certainly the case with Saladin, who is mainly celebrated for his exploits in the 1180s and 1190s, but the period which determined the trajectory he was headed in actually happened way before, in the 1160s, when the Crusaders decided to invade Egypt. Once a great power, Fatimid-controlled Egypt had been in decline for almost 100 years by now, and so the Crusaders saw an opportunity to extend their power, but so did Saladin's overlord, Nur al-Din, who was a great man in his own right for the decisive role he played in the Second Crusade. So Nur al-Din decided to send Saladin under the command of Shirkuh, Saladin's uncle, to Egypt in an attempt to exert his influence over the eroding power of the Fatimids. And so it's in the 1160s that Saladin establishes his reputation for cunning and courageous military action, and eventually climbs to the rank of vizier to the Fatimid Khalif in 1169. Only 2 years later, in 1171, the Fatimid Khalif dies and Saladin makes arguably the most important decision of his life. He decides to recognize the authority of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. This essentially brings about the end of the Fatimid Caliphate and makes him ruler of Egypt. This is where an interesting debate emerges. Remember how I said Saladin is almost unanimously respected by all? Well, one group that doesn't share that sentiment are actually a group of Muslims themselves. It's the Shias. Why, you ask? Well, the Fatimid Caliphate was unique in the sense it was the only Shia Caliphate. So a lot of Shias in the modern period have espoused criticism of Saladin's behavior towards Shias as being discriminatory because he decided to end the Shia Fatimid Caliphate and recognize the Sunni Caliphate. But there just isn't enough consistent historical evidence to suggest that Saladin didn't like Shias. And basing their claims of his discriminatory actions towards Shias upon that political maneuver is quite emotional and very basic, in the sense that it fails to acknowledge the desire for power in the political arena. Saladin didn't necessarily end the Fatimid Caliphate because he hated Shias, he just wanted power. Now, once Saladin took control of Egypt, there were a few years where it looked like a conflict between him and his overlord Nur al-Din in Syria was going to be inevitable. This is because Saladin consistently denied or ignored Nur al-Din's requests for money and troops from the resource-rich Egypt, and an almost inevitable conflict between the two was avoided by Nur al-Din's death in 1174. So, In the same way that political stability is tough to attain in modern-day Middle East, this was also the case in medieval Middle East. And so for the next 10 years, Saladin was forced to confront and conquer small city-states which broke away in the aftermath of Nur al-Din's death. And once he consolidated this period of centralization, he was ready to march against the Crusaders decisively. Perhaps the high point of his career came in 1187 at the Battle of Hattin, where he defeated and destroyed a thirsty and tired Crusader army. The path to Jerusalem was now open after this magnificent victory. But as is often the case in politics, your greatest victory can perhaps lead to failure. And so when Europe heard about Saladin's recapture of Jerusalem, it triggered what is known as the Third Crusade, in which the most powerful monarchs in Christian Europe rallied to the Crusader cause. Monarchs such as Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip Augustus of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire marched to the Middle East, where Saladin's forces were no match for the Crusaders, and he was repeatedly defeated in battle. But Saladin was smart enough to avoid a conclusive military encounter with the Crusaders, knowing that he was overmatched. The Crusaders recaptured some small cities, and their military success was punctuated by the successful siege of the city of Acre in 1191. Ultimately, the Crusaders were able to extend their presence in the Middle East but failed to achieve their key aim of recapturing Jerusalem. And so a peace treaty was signed between the two sides, whereby Saladin kept control of the holy city but allowed Christian pilgrims to enter in and out, as well as allowing the Crusaders to maintain their presence on the Levantine coast. So what do we make of all of this? Was Saladin the ultimate good guy? In my opinion, a question as simple as that does not do justice to the complexity of such a great figure. It is true that when he captured Jerusalem, many of its Crusader Christian inhabitants had to pay a ransom of some sort in order to achieve their freedom, but the ones who were too poor to do so, Saladin graciously freed them. But we must not forget that in the aftermath of the Battle of Hattin, after the Crusader forces were decisively defeated, Saladin took the action of executing hundreds of Crusader knights in the blow of a sword in a split second. But more important than this debate is the fact that he was a figure of authority, a point which is all the more important considering the part of the world he was governing. The Middle East is a notoriously difficult place to be able to instill your legitimacy upon your people. Too often, Middle Eastern societies rely upon the personal charisma of individuals rather than inherited political ideologies. And so, creating a unified political state is an exceptional feat and is one that Saladin earned through almost a decade of fighting and consolidating his rule over the area. What do you think is the greatest lesson to be taken away from Saladin's life? Thank you for watching and listening. A special thanks goes out to our patrons for continuing to support Hikmah History financially. I am indebted to your generosity. Until next time, peace.